Every year, people predict Penn State to break out and take their game to the next level. By that, they mean they think the Nittany Lions are going to go from 10-2 to potentially 12-0 or 11-1. Unfortunately, under James Franklin, that has just not been able to happen, and Penn State has not been able to get over the hump. Will things change in 2024? Honestly, I don't know. I want to say that Penn State will either make the college football playoff or at least win the Big Ten, but I just don't really know if it's going to happen. On paper, they have what it takes, but will it finally happen? I don't really know. In today's video, we're going to preview the 2024 Penn State Nittany Lions, go through their roster, talk about the storylines on the team, the depth chart, and how I think they will end up doing. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and preview the 2024 Penn State Nittany Lions. So in order to understand how Penn State got to this point, we need to talk about the 2023 season first. Last year, the Lions were led by new starting quarterback Drew Allar, who was the #1 quarterback in the class of 2022, and many were expecting him to take over right away. They had a two-headed running back monster of Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton, and many were wondering who would take over at the wide receiver position. They returned a top 10 offensive lineman and a couple of really good defensive players, so Penn State was supposed to potentially win the Big Ten. In week 1, they'd play against West Virginia, and this game was awesome, but it wasn't close. They won 38-15, and then in week 2, they destroyed Delaware 63-7. In week 3, they go on the road to Champaign, Illinois, and they would play against Illinois. The last time the two teams had played, the Illini won in 7 overtimes, but this time Penn State got the best of them and won 30-13. After that, they would have their whiteout game, and against number 24 Iowa, it wasn't close. They shut the Hawkeyes out 31-0, and many thought that Penn State was finally a different team, and they were going to put it all together. After that, they go on the road to play against Northwestern, and they win that game 41-13, and in retrospect, that's actually a pretty impressive win. Then after that, they come home and beat UMass. The Lions were now 6-0, but everyone was wondering, how would they do against Michigan and Ohio State? Well, their first game would come against number 3 Ohio State, and in this game, Drew Allar looked lost. Unfortunately, things did not go according to plan, and while they did only lose 20-12, it never really felt like they were in it, and it felt very disappointing. This was Penn State's first loss, and then from there, they'd almost blow it at home against Indiana. Luckily, they had some fourth quarter magic and won the game, but that could have been a catastrophic loss for them. After that, they went back and won 51-15 over Maryland, and then they get a chance to play against Michigan. If they could somehow beat the Wolverines, they could get themselves back in the college football playoff picture. Unfortunately, kind of like the Ohio State game, it was close on paper, but it really wasn't that close. They ended up losing 24-15, and now James Franklin lost the only 2 games that people really cared about on the schedule. After that, they beat Rutgers and then dismantled Michigan State 42-0. Nittany Lions went 10-2, but for the most part, people were kind of disappointed. They'd end up playing in the Peach Bowl against number 11 Ole Miss, and they ended up losing by a touchdown in that one. What was really unfortunate is that the 3 toughest games on their schedule, they lost, and while it was only by 1 possession, people were not too happy with that. The Lions ended up going 10-3, and as I said, people were disappointed. In Drew Allar's first year as a starter, he ended up throwing for 2,600 yards with 25 touchdowns and 2 picks, and while that is a really solid stat line, he could have been more accurate, and he just didn't play well in the biggest moments. He was brought in to win big-time games, and he just didn't do it. At running back, Kaytron Allen led the way with 902 yards and 6 touchdowns, and then Nick Singleton ran for nearly 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. The two-headed monster was great, and then in the receiving game, Keandre Lambert-Smith ended up leading the way with 673 yards and 4 scores, and then their tight ends, Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson, both had 7 touchdown passes. Dante Cephas was a big-time transfer who was brought in, and honestly, he was a little bit disappointing. On the defensive side of the ball, Kevin Winston Jr. led the way with 60 total tackles. Adisa Isaac led the way with 7.5 sacks. Daquan Hardy led the way with 7 pass deflections, and Jalen Reed led the way with 2 interceptions. Honestly, it was a good year for Penn State, but again, it was also somewhat disappointing. The Lions would end up sending 8 players off to the NFL, as Olu Fashanu went with the 11th overall pick to the Jets, Chop Robinson went with the 21st pick to the Dolphins, and then they had 2 third-round picks in Caden Wallace and Adisa Isaac, and then Theo Johnson ended up going to the Giants, Hunter Norzad went to the Chiefs, and then their defensive backs in Daquan Hardy and Kalen King went to the Bills and Packers. They ended up losing a lot of talent, and honestly, I don't know if things really plug in that well based on their recruiting and their transfer portal haul. The Lions ended up signing the number 14 overall class, which was headlined by 5-star tight end Luke Reynolds, interior offensive lineman Cooper Cousins, and then blue-chip quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer. Honestly, a 5-star tight end is not going to make that much of an impact right away, and then when you look at the transfer portal class, it was kind of small. They ended up bringing in former 5-star recruit Julian Fleming from Ohio State. They brought in Jalen Kimber, who's on his 3rd stop after Florida. They got corner A.J. Harris from Georgia, 2 Wisconsin players in Jordan Mayer and Nolan Rucci, and then a kicker from Tulsa. Honestly, both the recruiting class and the transfer portal haul were very underwhelming in my eyes, and James Franklin is going to have to figure things out, and in a hurry. Luckily, though, the coordinators have changed, as they brought in a new offensive coordinator from Kansas who's really turned things around there, and people are excited for him. And then they got Tom Allen, the former head coach from Indiana, to run the defense after Manny Diaz took over at Duke. When you take a look at the actual roster itself, it feels a lot like last year's team on offense at least. In terms of the key players on the offense, at quarterback you're going to have Drew Allar, who's going to be expected to take a huge step up, and then behind him you have their great backup in Bo Pribula, who I actually really like, and then you have the freshman Ethan Grunkemeyer. At the running back spot, they bring back their two-headed monster, as they'll have both Nick Singleton and Katron Allen back, and honestly, this is the best quarterback-running back duo Penn State has had in quite some time. They really need to make the most of it. Behind that, you have both Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin Jr., and then switching to the tight end spot, they bring back Tyler Warren, who should be one of the best tight ends in college football, and then behind him you have Khalil Dinkins and their true freshman Luke Reynolds. In terms of their offensive line, at right guard you're going to have Sal Wormley, at right tackle you're going to have Nolan Rucci, who transferred in, at center you'll have Nick Dawkins, and at left tackle you'll have Drew Shelton. There's also a guy who I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name at left guard. In terms of the wide receiver spots, Penn State kind of needed an overhaul. Caden Saunders should step up in the slot, and then at the Z position you'll have Harrison Wallace III. The main option on the team should be Julian Fleming, who's looking to fix his career after being somewhat disappointing at Ohio State, and then the backups will include players such as Liam Clifford, Tyler Johnson, Omari Evans, Mekhi Flowers, and Anthony Ivy. Honestly, there's a lot of question marks at the receiver spot, and I have no idea who's going to be their top guy. Honestly, we could see another year where Penn State's tight end is their biggest playmaker, but overall, the offense still gets a B+ from me. They're going to rely on their offensive line, their experienced quarterback, and their two-headed monster at running back, and they'll just need 1 or 2 players to step up at wide receiver to go alongside Tyler Warren. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm really excited for Abdul Carter and Kobe King, and then other players who should have a huge impact are defensive end Danny Dennis Sutton, corner Cam Miller, and then safety Jalen Reed. Obviously, there's a couple of other players as well, but honestly, this Penn State roster is weird to me. I think they have a couple players who have superstar potential, like Allar, Singleton, Allen, and Abdul Carter, but there's also a lot to figure out as well. In terms of their schedule, how do I think Penn State's going to do? Well, things do line up decently well for them. In week 1, they travel on the road to West Virginia, and in my eyes, this could really be a trap game. Neil Brown and Garrett Green really got it going at the end of last year, and West Virginia's going to be fired up. I could see a world in which Penn State is caught napping, but ultimately I think they're going to figure it out and win by a touchdown. After that, they come back home and play against Bowling Green, and that game will be over by the first quarter, and same with the Kent State matchup in week 3. Penn State will get off to a 3-0 start before they're going to host Illinois. The last time the Fighting Illini came into Beaver Stadium, they pulled off one of those crazy overtime shockers, but that is not going to happen again. Illinois is not catching anybody by surprise, and I'm not really too high on this Illinois team, so I think Penn State cruises to 4-0. After that, Penn State stays at home and they'll play against UCLA, who, as I've said in previous videos, I'm also not very high on. I don't know much about their new coach, but UCLA kind of has to revamp their roster, and I'm not expecting them to come into Beaver Stadium and win this. Penn State goes to 5-0, before they then have 3 straight major tests that'll determine the season. It's not quite like last year where they had Ohio State and Michigan, but road matchups against USC, Wisconsin, and then at home against Ohio State are going to be challenging. That first game comes on the road against the Trojans, and honestly, I have no idea who to pick in this game. I think it is truly 50-50, and it's going to come down to how good Miller Moss is by this time in the year. While it would be trendy for me to pick the Trojans to win this game, I do think Penn State is better, and I think they're going to run the ball down USC's throat and end up winning by a touchdown. After that, they're going to go on the road to play against Wisconsin, and the last time Penn State went to Camp Randall, it was a lot of fun, and I think it'll be like that once again. A lot of people are really high on Wisconsin, but I'm not going to pick them to beat Penn State. I think it'll be close, but Penn State will then cruise to 7-0 before the game of the year in the Big Ten, as they will host Ohio State at home. Honestly, I am really looking forward to this matchup, but as much as I want to pick Penn State to win, I just can't do it. Every year, I think Penn State will finally do it, and they don't, and Ohio State is really loaded at every single position, and I think the Buckeyes win this game pretty easily. Penn State has just not been able to show they can compete against the Buckeyes or pull it off, so for now, that'll be their first loss. After that, they're going to host Washington at home, who's in major rebuild mode after Kalen DeBoer left for Bama and Jed Fish came in from Arizona, and they lost pretty much everyone on the roster. Penn State should win this game pretty easily, and the same thing will happen against Purdue. The last time they played in Ross-Ade Stadium, they had to have a come-from-behind victory, but it's not going to be the case this time, as I think they're going to go in and beat Purdue very easily. After that, they're going to go on the road and play against Minnesota, and I'm not very high on this Minnesota team either, and it's not going to be like 2019, when the Golden Gophers knocked Penn State out of playoff contention. They said that's not going to happen, and then they finished the year with Maryland. I don't like this Maryland team either, and I think Penn State wins by 3 or 4 scores. If you do the math, that means that the Nittany Lions are going to have an 11-1 record, with the one loss coming to Ohio State. Honestly, their schedule is not difficult at all, as that USC, Wisconsin, and Ohio State stretch is really going to determine the year. Luckily, they have a bye game between the USC and Wisconsin matchups, which is why I think they're going to win both of them. Ultimately, I think they're going to go 2-1 in that 3-game stretch, and while there's a remote chance they upset Ohio State, I don't think there's any way they win all 3 of them. We're really just going to have to wait and see, but an 11-1 record would likely get Penn State into the Big Ten Championship, and it would definitely get them into the college football playoff, which is exactly what James Franklin needs to do to get him off the hot seat. I don't know if he's necessarily on the hot seat, but he really does need to perform. Overall, I think Penn State will have a really good year, but I don't know if I'm going to be picking them to go that far in the playoff. Their schedule is kind of weak, and for now, we'll just have to wait and see. But what do you guys think? If you're a Penn State fan, what do you think of my analysis? Who will be the key players for this year's team, and how do you think they're going to do? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you can support today's video. Let me know what team I should cover next. Subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video previewing the Oregon Ducks. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.